Ladies and gentlemen, I invite you to a silent prayer or meditation for 1 minute. Thank you. Most distinguished chief guest of today's function, Sri T.S. Tirumurti, President of today's function, Sri T.P. Sreenivasan, dignitaries, members of the organizing team, and dear participants. A warm and graceful morning to all of you. In the year 2021, UN Replica will debate and try to find resolutions for two main agenda items that pose as a threat to the entire world. That is, facing the challenges of climate change and the situation in Afghanistan. Even though the situation in Afghanistan is taking place in one corner of the world, we should regard the matter of Afghanistan as a matter of national security of all other countries, as it is not just a political or social issue, but it is a matter of security. Speaking of climate change, it is happening rapidly, dangerously at a pace, leaving us, the 1.8 billion young people around the world, highly vulnerable and inheritors of one of the largest challenges ever to face our world. To begin with, I would like to invite Ms. Deena Das for the welcome speech. Ma'am.
Most respected Sri T.P. Sreenivasan sir, former Ambassador of India and the Chief Mentor of UN Replica 2021. Most esteemed Ambassador Sri T.S. Tirumurti, Permanent Representative of India to the United Nations. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. The UN Replica in its 5th year is continuing its mission in pursuit of its vision of making the United Nations an organization of we peoples of the United Nations in the context of the 75th anniversary of the UN and the recent conferment of the special consultative status on Dr. Kalam Smriti International by the UN ECOSOC. UN Replica will bring the UN in its authentic form to give school and college students the experience of actually participating in the UN General Assembly and the Security Council debates on the burning issues of the time, the challenge of climate change and the Afghanistan. The sessions will be conducted strictly in accordance with the rules of procedure and established practices of the UN. It will benefit the participants by sharpening their skills in oratory, negotiations, consensus building, and diplomacy. Unlike other model UNs, the most attractive factor of UN Replica 2021 is the presence and mentoring of two great ambassadors of India, Sri T.P. Sreenivasan sir and Sri Tirumurti sir. And I'm delighted to have this opportunity to welcome them and you all to this prestigious function. UN Replica 2021 would have not been possible without the support of Sri T.P. Sreenivasan sir, who is presiding the function today. Sir, as you all know, sir is the most experienced UN diplomats of India and the only Indian diplomat who served as at the ambassador level at New York, Nairobi, and Vienna, and the head of UN division in the Ministry of External Affairs, New Delhi. He has chaired UN General Assembly, committees on UN reforms, financing of development, and the UN Security Council committees on arms embargo against South Africa and Article 50 of UN Charter. Sreenivasan sir has designed the UN replica and mentored it to bring the UN to our temples of learning for the benefit of the youth. A great author, an orator, and a guardian for all of us, we are highly privileged to have Sreenivasan sir to preside this function and to mentor our delegates on the procedures of UN. On behalf of Dr. Kalam Smriti International, member institutions, and the delegates, I extend a warm welcome to sir. Sir, welcome.
Thank you.
UN Replica is graced by the presence of most esteemed Ambassador Sri T.S. Tirumurti, permanent representative of India to the United Nations and the former president of UN Security Council, to inaugurate UN Replica 2021. Ambassador T.S. Tirumurti joined the Indian IFS in 1985. He served in Indian diplomatic missions in Cairo, Geneva, Gaza, Washington, D.C., Jakarta, and Kuala Lumpur. He has served at the Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India as Undersecretary, Director at Foreign Secretary's Office, Joint Secretary, and as Joint Secretary in the ECOSOC division in United Nations also. Tirumurti sir was the first representative of India to the Palestine National Authority. He was also the Deputy Chief of Mission in Jakarta and the Indian High Commissioner to Malaysia. Before being appointed as the permanent representative to the UN, he served as the Secretary of Economic Relations in the Ministry of External Affairs, India. On 19 May 2020, he took over as the permanent representative of India to the United Nations. During his current stint as permanent representative to the UN, India was elected as the UN Security Council member in July 2020 with an overwhelming mandate of 184 votes out of 192. And the delegates of UN Replica 2021 are really fortunate to listen to Sri T.S. Tirumurti and to get to know about the challenges and opportunities of being a diplomat. Sir, we are truly thankful for you for making yourself available to inaugurate UN Replica 2021 and also for an interaction even at this late hours in US and amidst your busy schedules. We bestow our respect and admiration to you and extend a wholehearted welcome on behalf of the organizers and the delegates of UN Replica 2021. So welcome. I also welcome Sri Shaiju David Alfi and Sri Rajesh Kulangara, who were the brains behind this function. And I extend a warm welcome to both of you, sirs. The delegates from various educational institutions across South India, UN Replica is one of the most popular ways to learn about the workings of the United Nations. It is often the first time that students are exposed to international affairs. We trust the mentoring sessions and interactions with other delegates will help you to achieve more knowledge on the procedures of UN and happenings across the world. On behalf of the organizing team of UN Replica, I welcome you all to this function and to the next 3 days for a very productive days in your life, studying, debating, and resolving. Welcome, delegates. I also extend my wholehearted welcome to the sponsors, Swisten and Kim's Health, and also the head of the institutions, academic coordinators, and other well-wishers who have extended their support by delegating their students and supporting us with their prayers. I also welcome the viewers all across the world to this event, UN Replica 2021. Thank you all. Have a great day. Jai Hind. Thank you.
Thank you, Dina ma'am. I request all participants to please switch on your cameras throughout the event. Moving on to the person who adorns every occasion with his magnanimous presence, Sri T.P. Sreenivasan, distinguished former ambassador of India to the United Nations. Sir, I invite you to render the presidential address.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Dina, for that wonderful welcome speech. Distinguished Ambassador Tirumurti, Mr. and Mrs. Shaiji David Alfi, Mr. Rajesh Kulangara, participants, friends, and viewers. Today we celebrate 3 occasions. One is the celebration of the life of Dr. Abdul Kalam, one of the most distinguished presidents of India. Secondly, we are celebrating the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, which is still going on, though we are in the 76th session. And then the very special honor that the Kalam Smriti International gained with the support of Ambassador Tirumurti to get the special status as a consultant status in ECOSOC, which is also a very rare honor. So all these we are celebrating today by organizing this 6th UN Replica, which has been conducted not only in Kerala, but also outside. We invented the UN replica to give the young people of India an authentic experience of the United Nations without any distortion of its form and substance. Here, we learn not only debating, but also negotiations, consensus building, and even deal making. Our aim is to make sure that if any of the participants one day ends up at the United Nations as a UN diplomat, he will think that he has been there before. It is that deja vu that we will be creating by this. Anyone who has participated in this, if they go to the United Nations on First Avenue, will feel that you have been there before. The issue may not be, the issues may be climate change or Afghan situation, but the procedures and modalities will be the same even after a few years, because the United Nations is a very conservative organization, and substance and subjects keep changing, agenda items keep changing, but the modalities remain the same, and therefore you can expect to see the same situation when you go over to the United Nations. A unique feature of UN Replica this time is the presence of the serving permanent representative of India to the United Nations and former president of the Security Council, Ambassador T.S. Tirumurti. While all of us are play acting in a way, but he is the real hero, because he is not play acting, he is playing his own role. This is like, suppose we produce a play on Mahatma Gandhi and Gandhiji himself playing the role. That's what I can think of as a comparison. Imagine when you are doing a Mahatma Gandhi play, Gandhiji arrives on the scene and takes on the lead role. That's exactly what Ambassador Tirumurti has done. And I must acknowledge that Ambassador Tirumurti was one of my favorite colleagues when I was in the Foreign Service. And it's a fitting tribute to his exceptional abilities that he was appointed as permanent representative of India to the United Nations. And he has already proved his mettle, and his name has become a household word in India, particularly his presidency and the hard time he had negotiating the Afghanistan resolution. So we'll be enacting that today, and it will be good. It will be great to have him here to advise us and tell us how to do it. So thank you, Ambassador Tirumurti, and very happy that you have been able to spend some time with us. We are not saying it in the normal way. You are really a busy person, I know, and it has not been easy for you to make this possible. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for giving an inspiring presidential address. Next, I am extremely overwhelmed to invite our beloved chief guest, Sri T.S. Tirumurti, the permanent representative of India to the United Nations and the former distinguished president of the UN Security Council, to give the inaugural address. Sir, please.
His Excellency, Ambassador T.P. Sreenivasan, Chief Mentor and President for the event, distinguished office bearers of Dr. Kalam Smriti International, distinguished delegates of the UN Replica 2021, distinguished sponsors and friends. It's indeed a great pleasure to participate in the 5th edition of UN Replica 2021, organized by Dr. Kalam Smriti International in the context of the 75th anniversary of the UN. It is remarkable to see the UN Replica go from strength to strength since its first edition in 2016 at the Labour India campus. You're all truly fortunate to have the experience of UN Replica, to have in fact, an authentic experience on how to tackle the pressing international challenges in a multilateral context, particularly in the UN. I would like to particularly thank His Excellency Ambassador T.P. Sreenivasan, the chief mentor, for not only mentoring you, but also mentoring me over all these years as my very distinguished senior in the Indian Foreign Service. In fact, when I was Under Secretary for Bhutan in New Delhi in the Ministry of External Affairs, I was posted as Second Secretary to the Permanent Mission of India to the UN in Geneva. When Ambassador Sreenivasan was Joint Secretary and the head of division for the United Nations, when I called on him and sought his advice on what I should expect in Geneva and the UN, he gave me a piece of advice which has stood me in very good stead right through my career. He said that Under Secretary for Bhutan at headquarters, I was dealing with important bilateral issues ranging from building of huge dams, airports, big projects, furthering political and trade relations, etc., in a very substantive way with an important neighbor. However, when I go to Geneva, I will accost a world where they spend considerable time disputing full stops and commas, where a particular word should be used and where it should be deleted, etc. He said that I will initially be quite frustrated and probably regret joining the PMI in Geneva. However, he added, at the end of my 3-year tenure, I will be so engrossed and taken up by these things in the UN that I may end up thinking that nothing really matters except the United Nations. He therefore advised me that as long as I don't swing from one extreme of bilateral relations to the other extreme of multilateral relations and manage to stay somewhere in between, I will do well in the Foreign Service. Why I mention this specifically is that dealing with multilateral or UN diplomacy can be frustrating, especially to get 193 countries on board. But it can also be very intoxicating since you're all dealing with all the countries of the world, and it feels as if you're shaping the world. So the truth is always somewhere in between. And that is a perspective all of you need to keep in mind, which is that the United Nations has its own place and a very important place in the world of today, but is not the only thing which shapes multilateral diplomacy. Friends, it is equally important for us to understand that the UN has been slow to change, slow to reform, therefore slow to react to some of the rapid changes coming across the world. Probably due to the inability of the UN to adapt itself in a nimble manner. And I refer particularly to the lack of reform of the UN Security Council, which all of you know has been frozen in time in 1945. Some have found it necessary to get together in smaller groupings to be able to address these challenges in a more meaningful manner. You are already aware, these include, for example, the G20, which now has a very strong say in many global issues, sometimes even more forceful than the UN Security Council. You're aware of BRICS, the Quad, which we just had a Quad summit in Washington, DC, the IPSA, which is India, Brazil, and South Africa, etc. And here I'm not referring to regional groups, but groups which have varied membership but coming together to fill that gap, which the UN may not be able to fill. This is why countries like India is at the forefront of reforming the UN and making it more relevant to address the contemporary challenges. And this is why the Prime Minister of India, Sri Narendra Modi, has called for reformed multilateralism. Therefore, in your discussions in UN Replica, the more you get deadlocked in discussions, the more you should be conscious of the fact that a potential deadlock in the UN can only provide the incentive for countries to go outside the UN and decide, and also weaken the member-driven process, which all of us are proud of in the UN. Consequently, on larger issues, you need to strive to see how UN membership can come up with meaningful solutions, which will necessarily involve compromises and adjustments. Of course, I'm not suggesting that you should give up your core interests, but what I suggest that you prioritize your interests and see where you can make these adjustments so that the UN remains relevant. Friends, India is currently in the Security Council, as you know, for a 2-year period. This is the 8th time we are in the Security Council. We have completed a little less than about 10 months. Given the fact that we have an independent point of view and an independent foreign policy, we have been able to effectively play a constructive bridging role on many issues. Our presidency in August, where we focused on areas of priority for us, like maritime security, UN peacekeeping, terrorism, etc. In fact, the Prime Minister chaired the session on maritime security, and this was the first time that an Indian Prime Minister was chairing a council meeting. We had an important presidential statement which was issued, a first of its kind on the holistic concept of maritime security. On UN peacekeeping, India has been the largest contributor of more than 250,000 troops over the years. And we drafted a council resolution, probably after more than 40 years, we drafted a council resolution on the protection of peacekeepers, which was adopted unanimously, with all the 15 members of the council co-sponsoring this. Our External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, chaired this session. We focused on technology and peacekeeping, and we contributed US $1.6 million to sponsor a technology platform called the Unite Aware platform to protect peacekeepers. We have also gifted vaccine doses for all UN peacekeepers of the world. This is India's way of walking the talk on peacekeeping. It may interest you to know that the first ever women peacekeepers were Indian. When our women UN police contingent went to Liberia under the UN banner. The third high-level event under our presidency was on terrorism. This is just to give a glimpse into what we are doing in the council. And I'm confident that as we go forward, we'll make sure that our stint in the council is productive and it is meaningful. It will also reinforce our claim for a permanent membership of the Security Council. The topics which you have been given to discuss in UN Replica, climate change and Afghanistan, are the two most important topics which the world is grappling with, whether inside or outside the UN. And I will try to give you my perspective on this. As far as climate change is concerned, almost everyone will agree that it is a priority for all countries and needs to be addressed with urgency, with commitment, and with sensitivity. In this, every country has a role, since every country is impacted one way or another. Almost all developing countries have been caught in a situation which they never created in the first place. Now, they have to be part of the solution in resolving and combating climate change. I have been a climate change negotiator for more than 6 years and under Ambassador T.P. Sreenivasan for nearly 2 to 2.5 years. It may be of interest to you that the word Nationally Determined Contribution, NDCs, which I'm sure you're familiar with, was primarily coined by India and Singapore. This term was particularly important since we had to find a via media between India, which has one of the lowest per capita emissions of greenhouse gases, and Singapore, which has one of the highest per capita emissions. So how does this process work for both of us? And that's why we came up with the word Nationally Determined Contribution in Warsaw in 2012, which subsequently, of course, became part of the climate change lexicon. Fast forwarding to today, we now have the Paris Agreement, to which the entire world has subscribed to. The importance of this agreement comes from the fact that it seeks to holistically tackle climate change in all its aspects. As you are all aware, the UNFCCC, which is the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, is a composite and an inclusive document, which includes mitigation, adaptation, financing, transfer of technology, capacity building, etc. And it involves a delicate balance between all these pillars based on certain fundamental principles, which I'm sure you're aware of, common but differentiated responsibility and respective capabilities, and also on the principle of equity. We have tried to maintain this balance so far in dealing with climate change and have resisted attempts time and again, but mainly by developed countries, to chip away at this very delicate balance between our common interests as well as our differentiated interests as developed and developing countries. I'm mentioning this since there are different voices now adding to the din on how to address climate change, especially with the urgency which has been underlined by the report of you're aware of this, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The question now is that, do we start cherry picking from the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement in order to supposedly move faster? Or do we seek to strengthen this holistic approach so that it can benefit all of us? It is also important to keep in mind that when we, as developing countries, called on Annex 1 countries, which is the developed countries, to account for whether they achieve the 2020 targets, which they have set for themselves, they promptly moved the goalpost to 2030 in the Paris Agreement. They never realized the 2020 targets. Now, the assessments which are coming from various international sources are very categorical that the developed countries, at least most of them, are not on course to achieve even the 2030 targets. Ironically, friends, India is the only country among G20 countries which is on course to meet the Paris targets. Some developed countries do not even have a credible pathway as yet for 2030. So, in the midst of this, instead of reinforcing and strengthening the implementation of the Paris targets of 2030, which also includes meeting the financing commitments as well, we are already getting distracted from this by the call for net zero in 2050. I'm sure you're aware of this call, which is going all over the world for net zero in 2050. So once again, the goalposts are now being moved to some 30 years later, rather than what we should be doing to achieve in this decade of action till 2030. In the meantime, we have also been told that the target of 2 degrees centigrade of Paris Agreement, which you're all aware of, is no more enough. And we need to immediately look at 1.5% centigrade. And all this pressure has come on the eve of this COP26, which is going to start in Glasgow in a few days. I would like to just mention briefly on net zero. When we discuss net zero, we need to first clearly define what is meant by net zero. Even if all the developed countries were to go to individual net zeros, that is each country going to net zeros, it seems evident that many developing countries would not have net zero by 2050. This is because many developing countries will be peaking later, given their nationally determined path of sustainable development. China, for example, has said that they will reach net zero only in 2060. And today or yesterday, I found that Saudi Arabia has also said that they will reach net zero only in 2060. So when we reach 2050, there will be some developing countries which will actually do a net plus at that point. They will not be at net zero at that point. Therefore, to compensate for the net plus in 2050, there should be some developed countries doing net minus if we truly believe that carbon space is limited. Consequently, we are looking at the vacation of carbon space in 2050 by developed countries to accommodate net plus by developing countries. Therefore, the concept of net zero needs to be redefined, and we should be aiming at global net zero and not individual net zero. Such a concept of global net zero will be more in tune with the principle of CBDR and of equity, as well as accommodate the reality of developing countries peaking later than developed countries. Even in the recently concluded Quad Summit in Washington, D.C., which just took place, you may not have noticed it, but the declaration calls for global net zero, not for individual net zero. So this is one aspect I thought it is important for you to understand. when you discuss this, later in the day and in the next few days. Further, there still exists a large gap to achieve commitment by developed countries to provide US dollars 100 billion for climate action. This amount is less than the amount earned by the US National Football League on media rights. I thought I'll just put this in perspective to you. Yet, we are struggling to raise US dollars 100 billion. Though, when we claim that this whole climate change is an existential issue, we are still struggling to raise 100 billion. And even the amount which has supposedly been mobilized so far has more of innovative accounting rather than innovative financing. Therefore, it's time we got serious about climate action, particularly from the side of the developed countries. Since all of you will also have Security Council discussions in UN Replica format, I want to mention that there are also moves in the Security Council to try and link climate change with security and separately deal with this issue in the Security Council. As I mentioned earlier, if one starts cherry picking from this composite and inclusive structure of Paris Agreement, then you will have a small group of countries of 15 deciding for the 193 countries in the UN. So we are convinced that a few should not be deciding for all. India has consistently held the position that we should not cherry pick and disturb the balance of mitigation, adaptation, finance and technology transfer, etc., but ensure greater focus on implementation of each one of them. India has also spearheaded many international climate change initiatives, and I'm sure almost all of you should be aware of the International Solar Alliance and the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, to ensure that we make a positive contribution to combating climate change at the global level. And this is in tune with our own domestic target to achieve 450 gigawatts of renewable energy, make India a green hydrogen hub, as well as enhance the share of renewable energy in the energy mix. We have also committed creating an additional carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent through additional forest and tree cover by 2030. Friends, the other matter which has engaged the attention and which has been equally important has been the developments in Afghanistan. It is a matter of coincidence that much of the recent developments unfolded when India was the president of the Security Council in August. And keeping our very strong interest in Afghanistan in mind, we had worked very closely with all other members of the Security Council to ensure that the Security Council speaks as far as possible in one voice on this matter. On August 30th, under our presidency, we adopted a resolution, which I'm sure all of you are aware of, resolution number 2593 in the Security Council, which remains an important benchmark for both the expectations from the international community as well as the commitments undertaken by the Taliban. The resolution 2593, it talks about, inter alia, the commitment of Taliban not to use and allow Afghan soil for terrorism, ensuring the rights of women, children, and minorities, inclusive negotiated political settlement, humanitarian access, and travel of Afghan nationals abroad in an unhindered manner. These are broadly the main elements. There are other elements as well. As you're all aware, India has been bearing the brunt of cross-border terrorism for decades. This resolution takes into account some of our collective concerns, in particular on terrorism, where it has noted the commitment of Taliban not to allow the use of Afghan soil for terrorism, including some terrorists and terrorist groups designated under Resolution 1267. This resolution, you may be familiar with it, 1267 has terrorists and terrorist groups designated under it, and it includes certain terrorist groups in Pakistan as well. It has the resolution, that is 2593, has also underlined that Afghan territory should not be used to threaten or attack any country or to shelter or train terrorists or to plan or to finance terrorist acts. It is therefore important that commitments made in this regard are respected and adhered to. As its immediate neighbor and a friend to its people, and with our development assistance to Afghanistan being more than $3 billion, with projects in every province of Afghanistan, the current situation in Afghanistan is of direct concern to us. Uncertainties abound about the future of the Afghan people, as well as about sustaining and building on the gains which has been achieved over the last 2 decades. In this context, we have reiterated the need for the voices of Afghan women to be heard, the aspiration of Afghan children to be realized, particularly girl children, and the rights of minorities to be protected. Another aspect which the UN will be dealing with, and fairly urgently, is the question of humanitarian assistance, which needs to be provided since the situation is there in Afghanistan is becoming increasingly dire. I understand that you will be discussing these 2 topics, both in the General Assembly and in the Security Council formats. Those of you who are here, who are representing the P5 in the UN Replica, will realize the disproportionate influence which these 5 countries wield over the rest of the United Nations, which is the rest of the 188 countries. I'm sure that you will discover this for yourself when you negotiate. I hope I have given you a flavor of how the dynamics go in the UN and how they impact the decisions we take or are not allowed to take. Like, for example, the Security Council reform, which is blocked by a handful of countries. Friends, in a pandemic world, the need to come together to take meaningful steps to combat the pandemic, ensure vaccine equity, put the world back on track to achieve the SDGs 2030, ensure economic recovery, and build resilient societies is all the more important. And these are things in which the UN has a very important role, and particularly for the LDCs, the LLDCs, the landlocked developing countries, and the SIDS, these small island developing states. So friends, I'm sorry to have taken a bit of your time, but I'm truly grateful to His Excellency Ambassador Sreenivasan and the Dr. Kalam Smriti International for giving me this wonderful opportunity to speak to you and share some of my thoughts. And I would like to wish you all the best in your deliberations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for the impressive and persuading inaugural address. Some participants have expressed desire to raise some queries to Sri T.S. Tirumurti. First question is by Advait Vijay from Labour India Public School.
Good morning, sir. My name is Advait Vijay, and I'm from Labour India Public School. The question I would like to ask you is pertaining to India's bid for the permanent membership Security Council. The question is, with USA, China, Russia, UK, and France dominating the Security Council, how it's possible for a nation like India to convince the superpowers for the veto power and permanent membership? Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you for this question. I think, as I alluded to in my speech, this is a very, very topical, literally a burning topic, so to say, but also a topic where there has been zero movement. And it is just a bit unfortunate that, especially in the last decade plus, when we have tried a new format, it is called the Intergovernmental Negotiating, it's called the IGN process. And that is the process which was set up in the UN, the IGN process, to look into this entire question of, reform of the UN Security Council. And interestingly, that is the only process which doesn't follow any UN rules. I thought I should tell you that there is such a process even within the UN. They don't even have documentation. It is not even put on the web TV or it is televised. And once the discussion goes on, there is no document where we are focusing the discussion on. All of us give speeches and we all go home. That is the reality of the IGN. And there are countries like us. There are other countries. We have other groups like, for example, there is something called the G4. There is another group called the L69. And there are also other groups like the Nordic group and other groups who are very keen to take the process of the reform of the Security Council forward. But there are a small group of countries which are blocking not just the reform, that they are blocking even the IGN process to become a normal process of the UN. And that is the unfortunate part. So why I'm mentioning this is that, yes, we have very specific views on the expansion, the numbers. India is convinced that Africa has to be represented among the permanent membership, because they have been there is a historical injustice which has been done to Africa, and they need permanent membership. We don't have Latin America, for example, represented in the permanent membership of the Council. And we ourselves, of course, as I mentioned, we consider ourselves as fully eligible to be the permanent member of the Security Council. But interestingly, the entire debate is going on outside the Security Council. And this is where we are hoping that we have a meaningful IGN process. Hopefully, we will have a text-based type of negotiations where all our different views are reflected there, so that we can have a meaningful negotiation. That's what we are pushing for, which we have not been able to succeed. But let me assure you that this remains a huge priority for us. And we have been at the forefront, along with many, many, many developing countries and a few others as well who are aspirants to see how best we can take this process forward. And what I fear, and something which I mentioned in my speech as well, that sometimes when this IGN process and all that goes on without any results and they are blocked by certain interested countries, then there is always the General Assembly which we can approach. But we are hoping that we will be able to convince countries to start looking realistically at a process. It's not as if it's going to happen tomorrow or day after, but at least we should start the process of negotiation in the IGN. And that is what we are trying to see. And I'm hoping that in this session, there will be greater seriousness with which some of our, those detractors will approach this whole issue.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Advait. The second question is by Dia Maria Shaji from Labour India Public School.
Good morning, sir. I'm Dia Shaji from Labour India Public School, Kottayam. Sir, taking into consideration that you are the President of Security Council.
Can you repeat it again, please? I'm not able to. Can you repeat it again?
Fall and Taliban took control over. My question: how was your experience managing?
Can you just repeat it again? I'm sorry, the connection got cut.
President, the Afghan government fall and took control over. Question is,
her connection is not proper.
Taking into consideration that you are the President of Security.
Maybe you can take the next question and she can come back.
Sir, I'll just read the question to you. What she asked is, taking into consideration that you were the President of Security Council during the time Afghanistan government fall and the Taliban took control. Her question was, how was your experience managing such a crisis, and that too in such high pressure situation?
No, thank you. Thank you for your question. See, it was like this, that even before we took over the presidency, there was a situation which was unraveling in Afghanistan. So therefore, during my press conference when I took over the very first day, there were questions on this issue, and I did tell them that we will have, because it is interesting. You would have seen the program of work, and Afghanistan was not scheduled in the program of work at all, because it was technically scheduled for September, because that is when the mandate renewal was coming in. So there was no
During
Afghanistan.
the time Afghanistan government fall.
So when this issue came up, we all anticipated that Afghanistan will be discussed in the council. And in fact, even in my press conference, I mentioned that I do anticipate the Afghan situation being discussed. So therefore, the first discussion was in the very first week when we had the discussion. And in fact, immediately, literally after a few days, we had another discussion on this. Why it was important to have these discussions, was that it was important to understand how the Security Council viewed the situation. And interestingly, there were some very common elements of the views among the Security Council members in these discussions. For example, one very evident one was that everyone was concerned about Afghan soil being used for terrorism. So I think it was a good thing that we had these two discussions. We were very proactive. Of course, there were one or two countries which were not very sure we should be having this discussion. As you know, there are three categories. One is called the briefing. The other is called the consultations. And the third one is, of course, called the AOB, and we have other forms. Now, briefing is done in the open. Consultation is done in a closed format in the Security Council. And AOB and others are, of course, done completely in a closed format. Now, some people felt that maybe a discussion of Afghanistan should not be in an open format like the briefing. But India particularly was very insistent that no, it should be done in the open format. It is important for the world to see what we are talking about, and that we are seized of the issue relating to Afghanistan and its developments. And frankly, I think that was extremely helpful. And later, we did come up with a press statement where we categorically pronounced on what we felt on the situation. And another press statement came much later. Once again, as the situation developed, we also ensured that we were, because everyone was completely engaged with the situation. And we realized that we need to look at it in a holistic manner. And that is how finally the resolution came about on the 30th of August. And it came literally on the last day of our presidency, because I think they understood that as the president of the Security Council, India had a very, very good understanding of the situation in Afghanistan, being a very close neighbor. I think that was also a factor which weighed in the minds of people who are drafting the resolution and discussing the resolution, that with India's presidency, you can have a resolution which is focused, and a resolution where they will be able to get a better understanding of the situation. Therefore, this resolution, as you can see, and we have discussed it, has all these 5 or 6 very, very important elements. And till now, that resolution remains a very important benchmark. And another thing which I did not mention, but now that I thought in any case you're going to ask questions, is that, see, India is also the chair of the Taliban Sanctions Committee. And so therefore, we already have, over the last several months, had, in the committee, we have had different views coming in, we had discussions. So it is also something which we know the UN aspect of the situation, how they are dealing with this. So therefore, it was very important that when we did the resolution, that all of us put our minds together, look at these various aspects where we have, a consensus, and we put that as a resolution. And even though the resolution was voted on, and 13 said yes and 2 abstained, but my understanding, frankly, is that some of the reasons for abstention were not necessarily on the substantive issue, They were on, they had some differences on how it went, but on the substantive issue, I think the Security Council was very clear. So I think that is how, but it was, I must say, it was a very intense period. And I'm very happy that India was in the chair, because our expertise, our understanding, and what we have done for Afghanistan helped us to also tackle a situation like this.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dia, for the question. So the next question is by Anudarsha SP from the Daleview College of Pharmacy and Research Center.
Greetings of the day, sir. I am Anudarsha SP from the Railway College of Pharmacy and Research Center. Sir, my question, we oftentimes see an unequal distribution of power in United Nations system. Like only 5 of the 193 member nations are only permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. So my question is, how is this an example of equality? And so what hasn't they done anything like reforms and amendments to make the system more fair and equal, sir?
Thank you. Thank you for your question. And I, of course, partly answered your question about the, reform of the Security Council. See, it is like this, that yes, Security Council is absolutely essential, crucial. They take important decisions. But when you talk about the UN, there are many things which happen where the P5 do not necessarily have a say. And when we were discussing climate change, in UNFCCC came about as a consensus document of all the countries in the UN. And now every one of us are engaged in implementing it. You look at SDGs. SDGs is once again a consensus document of all the countries. Now, I will tell you something very interesting on SDGs, that, before the SDGs, there was something called MDGs, Millennium Development Goals. Now, the Millennium Development Goals was given by the Secretary General to the member states to implement. And he said, these are the goals, please implement it. So when we started discussing the Sustainable Development Goals, the developed countries, and I'm sure some of the P5 as well, they wanted the Sustainable Development Goals also to be exactly like the Millennium Development Goals, which is that the Secretary General will have a list and he will give it to the member states and say, start implementing it. So this came up in what is called Rio +20 conference in 2012, where I was also present. And thanks to countries like India, Brazil, and many developing countries, we insisted that sustainable development goals should be discussed in the UN by member states. And it should not be a non-negotiated process given by the Secretary General to us. And finally, our views prevailed. And after that, that the negotiations took place. And in 2015, we actually adopted the Sustainable Development Goals. And now all of us are implementing it because the member states negotiated it. And everyone now has a stake in ensuring that we fulfill the 2030. So why I'm saying is that the membership-driven process is very important in the UN. And wherever we have been able to do that, we have been able to succeed and come up with really important things which affects all of us and which helps all of us. So it is therefore, when you talk about this P5 and the imbalance, yes, they definitely have a disproportionate influence on decision making. But that gets broadly confined to the Security Council, where, of course, political security and matters of international security are discussed. And there, it is a reality. So, but it is very interesting, till very recently, we had differences even between the P5. So we used to, call it the P3 and the P2 because they had these type of differences. And frankly, they became the checks and balances between themselves. So therefore, it's very interesting sometimes the dynamics, while yes, they are the permanent 5 and they have a very, very large influence, but they have their own dynamics. And in that dynamics, when we have the other countries also coming in and having a say and telling them, no, we do not accept it, it's not that easy for these countries to impose their will. It was easier earlier, but nowadays it has become that much more difficult for these countries to unilaterally impose their will on the continents or on states or on situations and say that, no, you have to do what we are telling you. I think that is changing very much, but we are certainly live in an unequal world, and we have to that's the reality, and we have to see how best we can make it more equal.
Thank you, sir, for clearing the queries raised. On behalf of the United Nations Replica 2021 team, I extend a hearty thanks to our beloved chief guest, Sri T.S. Tirumurti, the permanent representative of India to the United Nations and the former president to the UN Security Council, who spared his valuable time out of his hectic schedule to grace the occasion and inaugurate the event. Sir, we know that you are on the other side of the world, and indeed it is the time when you have taken a break out of your resting time to address us in the occasion. I'm sure your thought-provoking words have enlightened the minds present on this occasion and help us embark a new path. Thank you, sir.
Let me just say that I'm absolutely thrilled to be here, and that too in front of a person who have the highest respect for and who has been a model when it comes to dealing with multilateral system and the UN system, His Excellency Ambassador T.P. Sreenivasan. So that is, I'm really glad that I'm able to take part, and from whatever clarifications I've tried to give you, I'm sure Ambassador Sreenivasan knows things which are far deeper and more intensively about these issues than I do. Therefore, for someone like him to be able to mentor you through this process is, let me assure you, it's a fantastic thing for you. So I'm very happy for you, and I really wish that many of you finally grew up to take up diplomacy. And it's not necessarily the most popular these days, but I can assure you it's a very satisfying world of diplomacy. I'm not talking just about multilateral, but also bilateral. And if you are going to join the Indian Foreign Service, you cannot get a better platform than participating in something like UN Replica 2021. And I once again thank you very much for giving me this fantastic opportunity to interact with all of you. And sir, thank you very much, sir, for your mentorship through my career, and now giving me an opportunity to talk to these youngsters.
Thank you, sir. Further, I express my sincere gratitude to Sri T.P. Sreenivasan, the former ambassador of India to the United Nations, for being a versatile mentor and for guiding us in the right direction, without which the event could not have taken shape. Sir, you are an exemplary and visionary mentor, besides being a great leader who has dedicated his life to the service of humanity. We appreciate and treasure all the deeds that you have initiated for our betterment. Thank you, sir. I take this opportunity to thank Dr. Shaiju David Alfi, the Managing Trustee, Dr. Kalam Smriti International, for being the Chief Organizer of UN Replica 2021 and for being the pillar of strength in all initiatives and activities of Dr. Kalam Smriti International, stimulating each one to do their best. Thank you, sir. We express our heartfelt gratitude to Sri Rajesh Kulangara for hosting the website for UN Replica 2021 and for his active involvement in designing the well-thought poster and for being the partner for the conduct of UN Replica 2021. Thank you, sir. We extend our wholehearted thanks to the entire team of Labour India for hosting and being the partners for the conduct of UN Replica 2021. I thank Sri Sajeev and his team for setting up an excellent studio and providing all facilities for the conduct of the inaugural ceremony. I would also like to thank Ms. Deena Das, coordinator to UN Replica 2021, for being a helping hand all along the way. Thank you, ma'am. I also express my thanks to Alnor, Amrita, Anjana, Atara, Ruxana, Subala, Anudarsha, students of 4th year PharmD of the Daleview College of Pharmacy and Research Center, and also Ms. Sendila, faculty member, Railway College of Pharmacy and Research Center for all the efforts made since the beginning. The delegates of UN Replica 2021 deserves all our applause, for the entire event will be meaningless without your presence, and who are present here to make true the motto of the event: study, debate, and resolve. Now, the inaugural ceremony have come to an end. Thank you one and all.